By noon, the gallows in Willow Creek were finished, and so was Elena Hart. The sheriff had read her death sentence, the noose swung above her like a promise, and the crowd held its breath to watch her die. Then a widowed cowboy stepped from the edge of the crowd, tipped back his hat, and said in a voice that shook the scaffold, "Sheriff, hang me instead. I'm the one who killed him." By the time they finished the gallows, the sun had almost burned straight through the sky over Willow Creek. July light poured over the town like hot brass, flattening every sound, pinning every shadow in place. Boards creaked as the scaffold settled on its posts, tall and bleak in the center of the dusty square. From the window of the jail, Elena Hart watched the noose sway in the faint wind. It looked smaller than she had imagined, just a loop of rope against the glare. Yet her breath snagged every time it moved, like it had already found her neck. Her hands, raw at the wrists, where the iron cuffs had chafed, curled into fists in her lap. "You can sit, you know," Sheriff Amos Kincaid said from across the cell. "Floor's not going anywhere." She was already sitting on the narrow cot, knees drawn up so tight they hurt. "Is it near noon?" she asked. Kincaid hesitated, then tugged his watch from his vest. "Hour yet," he said. His voice held the flat weight of someone who had said this kind of thing before and hated it every time. "I didn't kill him," Elena said, because she needed the words in the air, needed someone to hear them one more time. "I didn't touch that man." "You been telling me that since the night we brought you in," Kincaid answered. "And I've been listening." He looked tired. There were deep grooves along his mouth, a map of all the decisions he'd made in this town, all the ones he'd wished he hadn't. He rubbed his thumb along his jaw, like he could scrub off the years. "But the jury heard the rancher's men too. They saw you with his boy's blood on your dress. And the law is the law, Miss Hart. The law's a rope choking the wrong neck," she murmured. He flinched at that, just a little. "Preacher's on his way. You got anything you want writ down, you tell me?" Elena swallowed hard. There was her little brother, Daniel, waiting 2 counties over with the widow who'd taken him in. She tried to picture his face the last time she'd seen him, half hidden behind the barn door, unable to look at her because they both knew she was leaving to find work. "You'll send word to Mrs. Carver?" she asked. "Tell her to burn my letters. Daniel doesn't need to keep 'em." The sheriff nodded. "I'll see to it." He left her then, boots echoing down the hall, his shadow slanting across her bare feet, and then gone. The cell felt smaller when he was no longer in it, as if the walls had inched closer while she blinked. Outside, the town hummed to life with the crackle of a crowd assembling, men's voices low and eager, women's sharp as cracked plates. Children darted between legs until someone hissed at them to get back. Jonah Price sat his horse near the back of the gathering and watched the gallows rise over the shifting bodies like a skeleton finger pointing at heaven. He hadn't meant to stay in Willow Creek. The town had been a place to water his horse, a place to trade 2 pelts and buy a sack of feed. He'd meant to ride on that same afternoon, keep moving the way he'd been moving for 3 years, ever since the fever took Liza and their baby in a single cruel week and left the bed hollow. But he'd caught Elena Hart's trial by accident, the way a man catches his own reflection in a dirty window and can't look away. She'd stood in front of that judge in a plain blue dress, hands gripping the rail, refusing to cry in front of the men who had already decided what kind of woman she must be. He had heard the rancher's foreman swear she'd lured the rancher's boy behind the stables for money and killed him when he wouldn't pay. He'd heard the lawyer repeat it like a hymn, and he'd seen the way Elena's mouth shook when she said over and over, "He grabbed me. I pushed him away. He fell. I never meant." Jonah had known then that he wouldn't be riding out of town. Not yet. People stepped aside as he slid from his saddle now, not because they knew him, but because he carried something in the set of his shoulders that made room for itself. His hat hung low over his eyes, worn brim shadowing the scar along his cheekbone, the line left there by a pistol butt in another town, another life. He tied his horse to the post and moved closer, every step dragging, like the street itself had grown thick and reluctant. When they brought Elena out, the square went quiet in an instant, the way fields go still right before thunder. Her hands were bound in front of her, a rope around her waist tied to the deputy's fist. She walked without stumbling, chin lifted, eyes fixed on some point beyond the scaffold. Jonah found he couldn't look at the noose. He could only look at her face. She caught sight of him in the crowd, and for a second, her gaze snagged on his like a hook. He saw confusion there, and something else, anger maybe that the whole world was standing here to watch her die. He had spoken to her only once, 2 nights before, through the bars of her cell while the rest of the town slept. She had asked him, blunt and tired, why he bothered sitting outside the jail like some stray dog. "You don't even know me," she'd said. "I know the look of someone the world's decided about," he'd replied. "Doesn't always make the world right." Now on the gallows, Sheriff Kincaid cleared his throat and unrolled a slip of paper with hands that weren't as steady as he liked to think. "Elena Hart," he said, "you've been found guilty by a jury of your peers of the murder of Jameson Pike in the 1st degree. Sentence is that you be taken from here to a place of lawful execution and there hanged by the neck until dead. May the Lord have mercy on your soul." The words struck Jonah in the chest like a board. Around him a murmur lifted from the crowd. Some faces hungry, some blank. A few turned away. The deputy guided Elena forward, each step landing on the rough boards of the platform with soft final sounds. Kincaid's jaw worked as he took the rope from the hangman, fingers clumsy for the first time in a long while. Jonah's feet began to move before his mind caught up. He pushed through the press of bodies, ignoring the curses as he shoved aside elbows and shoulders. Someone grabbed at his sleeve. He tore free. "Sheriff!" His voice cut cleanly through the muttering, sharp as a whip crack. "Hold a minute." Kincaid's head snapped up. Elena's shoulders stiffened. The whole town seemed to inhale and not let the breath go. Jonah reached the foot of the steps and planted himself there, chest heaving, hat pushed back so they could all see his face. "Jonah Price," the sheriff said slowly. "Don't recall inviting you up here." "Not here to be invited." Jonah's hands were empty, spread open for the whole town to see. "I'm here to take her place." A stunned silence rippled outward, then nervous laughter here and there, cut short when they saw he wasn't smiling. "What sort of fool talk is that?" someone called. "You can't swap necks like you're trading horses." Kincaid's eyes narrowed. "You don't know what you're saying, son." "I know exactly." Jonah's voice steadied. "I was there the night Jameson Pike died." Elena turned then, fully, her eyes widening as she stared down at him. "What are you doing?" she whispered, but the wind tossed her words away. Kincaid took a careful step closer, rope still dangling from his fist. "You best be sure of the next words out of your mouth, Price." Jonah swallowed, feeling every eye on him, the weight of them pressing between his shoulder blades. For 3 years he had walked with ghosts. Liza's laughter in the sound of water, his baby's thin cry in the wind through cottonwoods. He had promised himself there would never be another grave on his shoulders, never another life paid for his silence. "I was behind the livery that night," he said. "I saw Jameson Pike go after her, saw him grab her. I drew my gun to warn him off. He pulled his. He was drunk enough to shoot wild. I fired first." He could still see it when he closed his eyes, the lurch of the lantern light, the flash, the way the young man's body had folded as if his bones had turned to water. "I aimed for his hand," Jonah went on, voice rough, hit higher. He fell. She knelt beside him, trying to stop the blood. "I heard men coming. I ran." Gasps punctured the air, sharp and disbelieving. Elena was staring at him like he was a stranger, and yet the only true thing she'd seen in weeks. "You telling this town you killed Jameson Pike?" Kincaid asked. "I'm telling you my bullet did." Jonah lifted his chin. "If somebody's to hang for him, it ought to be me. I got nobody waiting on me, Sheriff." "She does." Elena shook her head violently, the rope at her waist trembling. "No," she said, voice cracking for the first time. "That's not how it happened. You didn't mean—" "I meant to stop him," Jonah cut in, eyes never leaving Kincaid. "Didn't matter what I meant. Matters what I did." The sheriff stared down at Jonah, then up at Elena, then past both of them to the crowd, which had begun to stir like a hive poked with a stick. Men murmured, calculating. The rancher himself, Henry Pike, pushed to the front, face mottled red. "This is a lie," Pike snarled. "Some saddle tramp looking for attention." "You let him talk, Kincaid. He'll have this whole town second-guessing the law." "Shut your mouth, Henry," Kincaid said, more sharply than anyone expected. "Man's confessing to murder. Law says I listen." He moved to Elena first, fingers working at the knot around her wrists. The rope fell away. For a second she just stood there, hands useless and free. "Step back from that trapdoor, Miss Hart," Kincaid said quietly. "You're not the one up here anymore." She stared at him, then at Jonah, then at the crowd that had come to see her die. Slowly, as if moving through a dream, she stepped to the side, away from the center of the platform. Kincaid jerked his head at the deputy. "Get Price up here, and put those cuffs on him." The deputy hesitated. "Sheriff, we don't know." "We know enough for this afternoon," Kincaid said. "We can learn the rest after." Jonah climbed the steps with the heavy clank of iron closing around his wrists. At the top, he stood where Elena had stood, the gallows boards hot beneath his boots. Below, the town shifted, struggling to fit this new shape over the old expectation. Some faces now looked uncertain, some outright angry. A few watched Jonah with a new, piercing curiosity. Elena was so close he could see the tear tracks she had refused to give them, thin silver lines on dusty cheeks. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "You could run, you could still run." He shook his head. "Been running my whole life," he said. "Tired of the view." Sheriff Kincaid nodded once, slow, like a man marking something down in his soul he would never forget. He picked up the rope again, its fibers rasping against his palms, then stopped. "Town of Willow Creek," he called out, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. "You just heard a confession that changes the shape of this crime. You also know I'm not hanging two people today just to be safe." The murmur rose again, louder. Pike shouted something about cowardice and justice, his words snatched away by the hot wind. "Sheriff," Jonah began, but Kincaid held up a hand. "No rope goes over any neck until I know exactly what happened," he said. "Price, you're under arrest for the killing of Jameson Pike. You'll stand trial for that. Miss Hart, you're remanded to protective custody until I sort through this mess with a fine-toothed comb." He turned to the deputy. "Get them both back inside." Boos burst from one corner of the crowd, disbelief from another. But there was a thread of relief woven through it all, a loosening like the town had been holding itself too tight and, just for a moment, had let go. Back in the dim of the jail, the cells opposite each other, Elena and Jonah sat facing through iron bars. Dust motes turned lazily in the narrow shaft of light cutting across the floor. "You threw your life on that scaffold," she said, after a long silence. "For a woman you barely know." Jonah leaned his head against the cool metal, eyes closed. "Didn't feel much like living," he admitted. "Felt more like carrying what was left." He opened his eyes, met her gaze. "But it ain't true I got nobody. I had a wife once. Liza. She was softer than this land deserved. Fever took her and our little girl before the doctor's wagon even made the bend." Elena's breath hitched. "I'm sorry." "Me too. Most days I wake up." His smile was crooked and small. "But if I'd let you hang for what my bullet did, it'd make whatever time I got left worse than any rope." She studied him, this worn man with grief carved into his features. "You could have kept your mouth shut," she said, "ridden out. No one would have known." "I'd have known," he said simply, "and so would the ghosts I ride with." Outside, hammers rang as men began to take the gallows apart plank by plank. The crowd thinned, tried to twist the story into shapes that made sense for them. Kincaid moved among them, gathering statements, shoving aside lies, following the thread of the truth wherever it led. By dusk, he had the doctor's word that Pike's powder burns were wrong for Elena's story but right for Jonah's. The stable boy's quiet testimony that he'd seen Jonah's shadow behind the livery, the bartender's grudging admission that Jameson had left his table spoiling for a fight that night. Kincaid stood between the two cells as evening stole the color from the sky. "I cannot promise you how the judge in Carson will see this," he told Jonah, "but I can promise you this town won't be hanging anyone for Jameson Pike tomorrow, or the day after." He turned to Elena. "Charges against you are dropped as of now. I'll telegraph the circuit judge myself." Her hands flew to her mouth. She made a sound, half laugh and half sob, then caught the bars to steady herself. "What about him?" she asked, nodding toward Jonah. "He'll go to Carson in the morning," Kincaid said. "Answer for his shot. But with what we got now, I reckon they'll call it manslaughter. Maybe even self-defense gone wrong. Not the rope." Jonah let out a slow breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. "Guess I'll have to get used to mornings again," he murmured. Kincaid's eyes softened. "You gave me a chance to do this right," he said. "Might have lost my soul today if you hadn't spoken up, Price. Don't think I'll forget that." The next dawn broke softer than the day before, the heat not yet settled in. Jonah stood by the wagon that would take him toward Carson, wrists shackled loosely, the town's dust clinging to his boots. Elena approached with a small bundle in her hands. "You dropped this outside the jail last night," she said, holding out his worn leather glove. It was a lie. She'd kept it on purpose, fingers worrying at the stitches until dawn. He took it, their hands brushing, a brief press of skin that felt like a promise. "Thank you," he said. "For saving my life?" She shook her head. "You didn't save it. You traded yours into the light so I didn't have to die in the dark. There's a difference." He swallowed around something thick in his throat. "What will you do now?" "Find my brother," she said. "Work honest. Maybe in a place where they don't build scaffolds so easy." She hesitated, then nodded toward the road. "And you? Answer for what I did," he said. "Then maybe come back this way, if there's anything worth coming back to." Her eyes held his for a long moment. "There will be," she said softly. The driver clicked his tongue. The wagon lurched forward. Jonah climbed aboard, the chains at his wrists clanking, but feeling somehow lighter than the weight he'd carried into town. As Willow Creek slipped away behind him, he looked back once. Elena stood beside Sheriff Kincaid, the two of them small against the widening sky. The gallows were gone, just bare earth where they had stood, as if the town had decided to forget it had ever planned such a thing. Jonah turned his face toward the road ahead. For the first time in 3 years, the miles did not feel like a sentence, but like a path leading somewhere he might still be worth the walking. Behind him, in a town that had almost watched an innocent woman die, a widowed cowboy's choice hung in the air like a bell just rung, its echo promising that, sometimes, the rope doesn't get the last word.